Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to my second version of Chess Academy, Chess Lessons for Parents. Now that you know how all the chess pieces move, let's begin learning how to actually play the game. The very core of chess is about protecting your king at the same time trying to checkmate your opponent's king. So the first thing you need to know is, of course, what is check and what is checkmate. Check is very simply when the king is being threatened to be captured. So that goes for any piece. Let's just move a few pieces here. For example, let's turn off the chess engine so that we can actually move somebody else's pieces. There we go. So, for example, this is one of the basic openings that people do. I'm not going to name it. So, right now, white moved out. It's King's Knight. So, the knight is right now attacking that pawn. So, in other words, I'm threatening to capture that pawn. Okay? You might even say that that pawn is in check, but we don't generally say that. Okay? And generally speaking, the opponent would try to protect that pawn with a similar move. Okay? So, what is check then? Okay? Check is when you're in check when your opponent threatens to capture your king. So after a couple of moves, black has pulled out his bishop. And yes, he is threatening my king. So I am in check. It's not checkmate because I can get out of it, but it's check. It's the same as threatening any other piece, except it's the king. And it is absolutely imperative, absolute law in chess. You cannot do any other move. You cannot make any other move when you're in check except to get out of check. Okay? So, to get out of check, you could either move your king out of check to another space, or you can block the checking piece. So in other words, for example, I can move my pawn to block the bishop, or I can move the knight to block the bishop, or I can move my own bishop to block the bishop. Okay? Or of course I can move my king. But as I talked to you in the previous video, I don't want to move my king because then I would lose my privilege of castling. Okay? So that's what check is. Okay? Check is when you are being threatened, your king is being threatened to be captured, or when your opponent is, when you attack your opponent's king and you are threatening to capture his king. That is check. Okay, so what is the difference between check and checkmate? Again, check is when I can stop the threat. Okay, I just moved my pawn up. That's an example of how I can stop the threat. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and I'm going to set up a position where there's going to be a checkmate, where the king cannot get out of checkmate. Cannot get out of check, and it'll be checkmate. Okay? So let me go ahead and pause this. I think it's Control P. Okay. So in my first example, this is only check. It's only check because while the queen is the most powerful piece, it's meaningless because there's nothing stopping the king, the black king, from capturing. The black king has to get out of check. Remember that. So he can't move here because the queen could also go there. He can't move here because the queen could also go there. But there's nothing protecting the queen, my queen, the white queen, from the king just simply capturing. Okay? So that was only check. Okay? Okay, now we're going to go to another setup. Okay, now all I did here was add a piece. If we remember, knights move 2 spaces, then 1, or 1 space, then 2. In other words, that knight, my white knight, is protecting the queen. This is checkmate for black. Black has lost. Black cannot get out of check because he cannot capture the queen, because the knight will still be putting him in check. Okay? Before, the knight wasn't there and the king was free to capture the queen. But now the knight is there and the king cannot capture the queen because the king will still be in check if he tried. So this is the end of the game. Black has lost. This is checkmate. Okay? So, in other words, the whole core of the game, it's basically a war game. You have your armies. You are there. Your job is to protect your king while attacking your enemy, whichever color you're playing. I happen to be on the white side here, and black is my enemy, and I checkmated him. Okay? But in order to get to these positions, of course, there's an entire game to be played. So now that you know the difference between check and checkmate, and that the whole game is surrounded around trying to checkmate your opponent, let's see how the game actually starts. Now, the very first question beginners ask is, okay, I know how the pieces move. I know the difference between check and checkmate. But how do I start? What's the idea of getting the game started? How do I know what the best move is? That sort of thing. So with that, for the answer in that, there's basically 3, sometimes 4 principles, 4 basic opening principles that we use as general guidelines. What I mean, like you have rules of thumb for different things in life. There are basically 3 or 4 rules of thumb in the opening moves of chess that you should follow. There are times where some of those rules of thumb get bent or broken, but generally speaking, there are 4 rules of thumb. Okay, I won't bore you with the well-established openings, the Roy Lopez and all those names and stuff like that, named after the masters or the countries that they came from. In fact, I don't even know most of them myself, except for some of the oldest ones, like the Queen's and King's Gambit, declined and accepted. I'll get into that in some later videos. But no matter which one, if you want to learn them, that's great. That's a good thing to do. But you'll find while you start to play that all of them follow these 3, maybe 4 basic rules or principles. Okay? And that is center control. Okay? So number 1 is center control. Let me go ahead and clear this board. In fact, I'm going to do it while, I'm not going to pause it this time. I'm just going to let you see me do this. Okay? We're just going to go ahead and reset the board. All right. There we go. All right, so what do I mean by center control? Essentially, from the very beginning, you want to pay attention to these 4 squares. Okay? You have the flanks of those squares, etc. There are different ways of controlling. But what you don't want to do for number 2 is you don't want to move a piece or a pawn more than once in the opening, generally speaking. There are times where you move a piece out and it gets threatened and you have to move it, but generally speaking, it's control of the center. Try to develop your pieces, generally speaking, knights before bishops. And you don't want to move those knights and bishops or pawns more than once in the first few moves of the opening. Okay, so that's, let me see, how many is that? Is that 2 or 3? I'll give you the list. 1 is center control. 2 is development. Usually you want to develop your knights and bishops first. Usually they tell you knights before bishops, but there are times where even grandmasters open up with the bishops first. Again, I'm not going to go into those details, but you really have to know what you're doing when you do those sort of things. Number 3 is don't move the same piece more than once, if possible. And number 4 is a little bit ambiguous. They tell you don't bring your queen out too early. There are, however, times where, especially beginner players, bring the queen out early and they manage to very quickly checkmate their opponent. But bringing the queen out early against an expert could lead to a quick loss of your queen. Also, even if you don't lose the queen, what happens is it causes you to move a piece more than once, because you bring out your queen and then your opponent starts attacking your queen and you don't want to lose your queen, so you start moving it again and again and again. And what they call that is tempo. You lose tempo. You lose time. By moving your queen around 1,000 times, you end up losing time to bring out your other pieces. Okay? So, the general principles are, again, trying to control the center, developing your pieces, bringing your armies out, that sort of thing, and not to move the pieces that you do bring out more than once, at least in the beginning of the game. You don't want to move, like I said, there are times where sometimes you end up moving it twice. Like I might move my knight twice because it gets threatened in some certain openings and stuff like that. But the general rules of thumb, if you can follow them throughout your learning how to play, if you follow the general rules of thumb, you should do pretty well. Now, as you learn more strategies and what have you, you may want to try breaking or bending some of those rules. But generally speaking, try to control the center, develop your knights before bishops, don't move them more than once early in the opening, don't take your queen out too early. Now, developing pieces also includes castling, and we went through that. But there are times you don't actually castle, and I've showed you a game on that one too. So, for example, generally speaking, some of the oldest and mostly used openings today, even by grandmasters, even in the games that you've seen in the World Championship match, they often move out either the king pawn or the queen pawn. In notation speak, is either the E or the D pawn. So why do they open up like that? Well, for one thing, we'll talk about control of the center, right? At this moment, by moving my pawn there, I have control over that square and that square, okay? And my next move, after black moves, I'm going to try to protect that pawn. So for example, maybe black moves his knight out, attacking that same pawn, right? Actually, let me make that yellow. So I might move my knight out, reinforcing that same pawn. That's just an example, okay? Maybe black's next move. Generally, you want to bring out your pawns first, but there is an opening called the four knights opening. But in any case, so now black brings out his king pawn. So now he's controlling this square and this square, right? So maybe I want to try to take back control. I might pull out my knight to attack that pawn, for example. Okay? So far, so good. The other thing that bringing out the pawns on the front, in front of the king do is it also opens up the ability for your bishops to come out. Since you want to develop your bishops, and your queen also has room to come out. Of course, I put my knight there, so it can't go any further than this. But nevertheless, the king pawn opens up two diagonals. It opens up the queen's diagonal and the bishop's diagonal. Okay? Now, I don't remember whose turn it was. Okay, so it's black's turn. So maybe black moves this pawn. Okay? Now, he also just now opened up his bishop's diagonal, but he also blocked his other bishop. Now, say I open up with my second pawn. Now I'm opening up my other bishop's diagonal. Okay? And further opened up room for the queen to come out. You'll notice that, yes, black can capture my pawn, but I have a knight and a queen protecting that pawn. So I have two pieces on his one. So that pawn for now is safe. So these are the general principles of opening. You get the idea. So your question is, what do I do first? If you think about the first general principle about trying to control the center, you'll see that even in the expert games, the whole idea of the opening is to try to control that center and also to protect the pieces that are trying to attack those squares. You don't necessarily have to attack a piece. You could actually attack squares, or you can try to control squares. So there are important squares. And the important four squares in the beginning of the game is the four center squares. So this is the general idea of what to do in the first few moves, okay? So let me pause this for a minute and try to gather my thoughts and get to the next idea. All right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is you can see this is a database of thousands of games. I'm just going to pick one at random, and I'm going to let it play and talk to you while it's being played. You'll see that no matter how old or new the game is, you'll see that they basically follow the general principles. So let's go ahead and just pick one at random. Let's try to find something newer. Let me see, something from 1989 perhaps? Alright, let me see. Alright, I'm just going to close my eyes and double click on one. Okay, there we go. So this is between, I don't even know these people, Manfred and Klaus. Okay, these are two grandmasters. It's a match of some sort. I don't know if it's a championship game or not. It was played in 1989. They're calling this opening the Sicilian Nidroff. But nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and make the game play by itself, and you don't have to expertly follow it. Just watch as the pieces get opened up, and you'll see that they follow they'll follow the basic principles of opening and some. These are grandmasters, so they're beyond my own abilities. But let me just get this thing to play. Where am I here? Come on. All right. Okay, let me pause this for a minute. Okay, sorry about that. I forgot how to get this thing to replay by itself, and I realized it's under the game menu. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and push replay. Okay, so you can see black decided to do the flank, but you can see the idea here is still in the control of the center of the board. White brought out his knights first. And I believe the game ended with black winning. Okay. I'm supposed to speak while it's playing because otherwise they won't monetize it. And there you go. Now you can slow this down if you like. If you can pause it and watch the game. Remember, this is between two grandmasters. But just to give you an idea on how, if you go back to the beginning of this game, you'll see that the basic principles, no matter how much of a grandmaster these two are, the basic principles are being followed. Okay. And like I said, I believe black won this game. Apparently, white has resigned. So, there's an example of a grandmaster match between two grandmasters following the opening principles. Okay, so let's go all the way back. Okay, white opens up with e4, already trying to control the center. Black responds with the c pawn, which is a very common opening. In fact, it's known as a Sicilian. Okay, what that does is on the flank, it tries to control these squares here while putting pressure on that square there, etc. Okay, the knight tries to take back that control, okay, etc., so forth and so on. So now, one of the general principles for white has been sort of violated because white did in fact move his knight a second time. It's right there, but not until after he moved his pawn. So these are the ideas I'm trying to show you, where you don't necessarily have to follow the general principles verbatim, but if you do, generally speaking, you see white castles there, generally speaking, you'll do well. All right, so let's get back to the original idea, and let me pause this one more time. So now you have the basic understanding of the entire game. You know how the pieces move. You know the special moves. You know about castling. You know when you cannot castle. You know how pawns move only forward, never backward, but they capture diagonally. You know that pawns get promoted when they reach the end. You know about basic principles in the beginning of the game is the control of the center, the strategy. So I think I'll leave it at here for now. I feel that the next video should be about some strategy and tactics. What you saw in that last game was there were some pins going on. I didn't really take a close notice for any forks, but there are things in chess called forks, pins, skewers, etc. So these are some of the general tactics being used during any game, from beginner to grandmaster. And I think that's what we'll cover next time. So I hope you enjoyed this particular video. It's not exactly the most exciting game on the planet, but learning how to play chess is like an exercise machine for the brain. Teaching your kids, if I'm speaking to parents right now, how to play chess is opening up a way for them to exercise their brain. So keep on playing. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Enjoy the game, and my next video will get a little bit more into detail about actually playing the game. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.